Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, continuing on with Roblox, we're going to estimate, or I guess forecast out their operating expenses. If you didn't watch our last video, we calculate some revenue estimates. I'll link to that video if you want to see it as well. And we're going to use a little bit of those estimates to build out our expense schedule. So first thing, really wrap our heads around the information I pulled out of the 10K that I thought would be pretty useful here is percent of revenue and where it comes from. And we'll touch on this on why that's important. And then after this, we pulled out revenue, cost of revenue, and then all the kind of subcategories. And then stock-based compensation. And then they also have some direct listing costs that are hitting SG&A in 2021. That's really distorting that number. So we'll look at that as well. So first thing is modeling out the cost of revenue. And so this is payment processing fees is what they consider it. So this is going to be if someone purchases something on their platform, if they're paying a commission to the App Store or the Google Play Store, this would be captured there. And then anything outside of that, general payment processing fees as well for that piece. So first thing we really need to look at here is App Store. How much of the revenue does it make up? Google Play Store, and then the other piece. So we can see historically, the data as far back as they gave us was 2019, but we can see the App Store has grown from 30 to 35%, and then the Google Play Store has stayed at about 18%. So the reason this is important is these two pieces automatically flow through with a 30% cost of goods sold. So anytime someone buys something in the App Store, even if it's for Roblox, a 30% cut of whatever they spent is automatically sent to Apple, and there's nothing Roblox can do about that. Whereas if someone buys $100 of Roblox through the Roblox website, then it goes 100% to Roblox, and they just pay whatever their payment processing fee is of probably a few percent or some fixed amount they pay annually, or something of that nature. So the mix of revenue really does can make a pretty significant difference. So we'll see cost of revenue here. This is cost of revenue percent as a percent of revenue. And I'm tying it back here to the cost of revenue percent that they have in their actual financials. So, right, this 24.1, 22.5, 26, 25.3. So what we had to do first is solve for the other costs. So if we look at this, right, I've set up a example scenario to calculate the margin. So we have $100 of revenue. If we have $100 of revenue and we know 30% comes from the App Store, that's going to end up costing the company $9 million if 30% of that, or $9 if 30% of their total revenue comes from this. The calculation here is the $100 times 30%, so that would give you 30, and then times the margin or the cost of 30% that goes right to Apple, which would be 9. So that's the first part. The next one, exact same thing for Google Play Store. So we can calculate that, and that's 14.4 million, which would be 14.4% on $100 of revenue. So we have to plug for this other cost. So looking at this other cost, when we plug to get the cost of revenue percent, which is this 24.1% here, right, we get 9.7. And that gets us our total cost of revenue of 24.1, but it also allows us to get this other cost percent of revenue. So anything that flows outside of the App Store or the Google Play Store has a cost associated with about 9%. So the reason this is important is as we shift the mix of revenue, obviously, right, if less revenue is coming from other, then obviously less of it is coming through at that low cost. If more revenue is coming through there, then it would be at this lower cost of revenue. So just something to kind of keep in mind here as we work through this. But the first thing we'll do is we're going to forecast out other costs of revenue. This looks like it's been a pretty steady percentage, around this kind of mid-9s. So I think I'm pretty comfortable here just setting this to 9.5% for now. And ultimately what we're trying to do is get a total cost of revenue that we can then plug in down below into our revenue projections. So 9.5%, I think that seems pretty safe. It doesn't seem like there's been a lot of fluctuation here. Now the big question is, how do these pieces change? And what we'll see here is, say this becomes 50%. and then this becomes 25%, right? So they're, you know what I mean, 75% of the revenue is going through the App Store and Google Play Store. If that's the case, we'll see their margin profile gets worse by 7%, right? Cost of revenue goes from 25.3% up to 32%, right? And you can see this just kind of slowly increase, right? If we make this 75%, so everything's coming through Apple and Google Play, right? Then what we're seeing here is that, you know, there's this kind of like max, I mean, so I guess the way to think of it is there's a maximum cost of revenue of 30%, and then layered in this other cost of revenue. The problem with the other is they don't give us enough information. We don't know if it's directly tied to this other piece of revenue or if there's additional costs associated with Apple Store and Google Play Store, if they have, you know, maybe some server costs or something else. So really the highest margin you could get is 39.5 based off the way we're making these assumptions, because they don't give us quite enough on this other cost to know if it's directly tied to the amount of revenue or not that comes through there. So this is kind of our proxy. But my thought is Roblox has seen an incredible shift to mobile, and I think, you know, honestly, as the world kind of reopens, if people continue to play this game, you know, they may switch from playing on PC at home when they're at home all the time to commuting to somewhere to school or whatever and start playing on their phone. So I do actually think we will see this kind of increase slowly and maybe eventually approach kind of like a little over half of their revenue. Something like that is kind of my thought. You know, I think, and you know, you end up getting kind of this blended average where you kind of approach about 30% in total for cost of revenue. And this is all primarily driven by Apple and Google charging that commission. Otherwise, their cost of revenue would probably be 9.5%. So I think this is also one of the biggest risks with Roblox is just their reliance on these platforms. And right, Google and Apple could come out tomorrow and say, oh, now it's going to be 35%. So there's, you know, they're kind of at the mercy of these larger platforms where their game is distributed. So I think that this is probably a pretty good first pass. The next piece to look at that we're going to project out is developer exchange fees. And, you know, I was thinking about, you know, looking at this, can we build out a big complex model? They tell us like if a developer sells something that's within a experience within the game or the studio marketplace, they get to keep 70% of whatever is spent on it. Whereas if it's sold in the avatar shop, they only get 30%. So, you know, I was thinking building out this big model, but I don't think we quite have enough data here because there's also this exchange rate aspect where you can only exchange one Robux for USD at 0.003 cents, something like that, whereas it costs 1 cent to buy Robux. So I think there's a lot of factors that we just don't quite have enough information on. So I really think for this, we're probably honestly better off kind of looking at historical averages and making an assumption from there. You know, we've seen this go from 22 up to 35 back down to 30. So it does look like it's slowly coming back down. So my thought is I'm going to have this kind of decline back and then level off at historical averages. And, you know, I think with time, as they put out more press releases and investor presentations, maybe eventually we would get enough information to really understand developer exchange fees and build out kind of a more holistic model similar to what we did up here for the cost of revenue. But at this point in time, I just don't think the data is there or provided for us to do that. And, you know, I think that this is something that they're going to look at and say, like, we have to reduce this somehow, whether that's reducing the exchange rate or something else, because you can't be giving up 30% of your revenue to these developers. While I understand that that's like they're developing applications on your platform for users to use, so they're really content creators. I understand that aspect of it, but it's probably cheaper to bring that in-house then and just have professionally developed experiences where people work on it full time at the direction of Roblox and what they want, almost like an R&D. And right, they spend less on R&D than they do on developer exchange fees. So I think there's definitely room for this to improve over time. Infrastructure, trust, and safety. This is a lot of their data centers. Obviously, this scales. More revenue you have, the lower percentage this is. I think we've seen that here, right? It's as a percent of revenue, it's been declining. So I think that that's probably pretty fair. It looks like it was dropping 2% a year, so maybe we'll just do that. And honestly, I don't know where this kind of levels off. Um, and obviously, I don't think we ever want the cost to be decreasing. So I think that's kind of the key here is, right, as revenue slows, then we can't really have this be decreasing either. We need it to be constantly growing, but maybe it doesn't have to grow that fast. So, right, if we take this Q1 number multiplied by 4, just for simplicity's sake, right, you're going to be at 360 million. And we've seen it grow pretty rapidly, but so maybe even this first year should only decrease by 1% if we're at like, maybe we just hold it flat this first year actually. Um, so we'll kind of go with that, and you can see we still have it growing every year a little bit to support the increased revenue, but at a certain point, right, you have just kind of economies of scale. So I think that that's probably a pretty fair assumption. R&D, this one I'm having a hard time with. It's been expensive, 25% of your costs on R&D. And, stock-based comp actually of this 31.6 million, it's almost a third of this was, stock-based comp, but I guess last year it was only 20%. And the year before it was 10%, pretty high in 2018. So there's a big stock-based comp piece that we will end up backing out, but I think it's not sustainable to kind of stay at these levels. They got to become profitable is the problem. And right now there's just too many costs. That's the issue. So I think they have to like quickly cut this. Otherwise, I mean, they're just in for a world of hurt. If we look at the absolute dollars, right? I mean, maybe we'll say 2020. I mean, even that just seems high. Maybe we just kind of set it to like whatever we need to hold steady to like a 200 million a year R&D budget. Because at this rate, they just have so much cost. Like things have to, oops. And there's probably a better way to, I set it up so it's like a driver off percent revenue, but I'm just trying to keep it in line with about, I know it's a little all over the place there, but just trying to keep the absolute dollars at about 200 million a year in R&D, which right there we get, average 199.8. We're pretty close. So I think that works. G&A's got to come down, right? We got to get back to the 8%. And actually, for this one so far, it should actually be, we should back out our one-time costs, our direct listing costs. So that's why I pulled that in. So if we do that, right, you're at 11%. That's a much better number. I think we have, something like go back to 2019 levels, and then even we're going to see improvement there as we continue to scale, and we'll get that down to about 5% or so, and then have that level off. And then sales and marketing, right? I mean, we've actually just been seeing this decrease. So maybe we kind of stick with that and have it decrease at 0.25% a year until we get to about, I don't know, let's call it 3.5. And then from there, we'll level out. But I still think they got to do work. The big thing here is the developer exchange fees. The things that they can control is this. right? They can't really control this. How many of our users they have is going to require a certain amount of resources and infrastructure. R&D, it's definitely a cost they can control. G&A they can control. Sales and marketing they can control. But cost of revenue and infrastructure they can't really control in those two pieces, right? Even in 10 years from now, making up 44% of their costs, and they're making up 50% today. So definitely a big thing to consider. But we have them going from, right, this year it looks like they're on pace to hit 2 billion in costs. I don't think it'll be that high. I think there's a lot of stock-based comp here, right? 50 million of stock-based comp. So if you back that out at Q1, you're closer to, and this, so I guess you back out 100 million, you're actually closer to 400. Yeah, I mean, you're on pace to do 1.6 billion in costs this year, so you're going to lose a bunch of money um, again. So, I think the way we have this modeled, right, it has them costs exceeding revenue in 2022, 2023 that, shifts, and then we see it slowly get better over time as margins improve. But just looking at this, I mean, these are some pretty slim margins, um, which makes me think, this is probably highly priced as if this revenue growth they experienced in 2020, where they doubled, is going to continue, and I just don't believe that. Um, but I guess we'll see as we build out the rest of the model. The last thing we'll build out real quick is just stock-based comp, as we will link that up later. And for these, I'm actually just going to link them back to 2019. Usually stock-based comp, once it's kind of established and a plan is in place, it stays pretty consistent. So I wouldn't expect stock-based comp to fluctuate heavily, and I would think that like kind of pre-IPO level is probably the best normal year we had, and we'll just kind of stick it in that range. And you see it actually goes down as we kind of shift overall costs, but I think that's a fair assumption. So this is what we'll end up using. That will plug into the DCF, and we'll get that video out in the next day or so, and we'll walk through the final valuation. So thanks for tuning in, and let me know if you have any questions or comments.